Welcome to the Team Coaching Zone podcast. Join your host, Dr. Krister Lowe, and today's leading organizational coaches as we explore the art and science of team coaching. Get ready for 45 minutes of pure inspiration and to take your team coaching practice to the next level. Now, let's enter the zone with your host, Dr. Krister Lowe.
Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of the Team Coaching Zone podcast. I'm super excited to welcome a dear friend and colleague onto the show today. We have Dr. Susan Coleman of the Peacebuilding podcast joining us. Susan, welcome to the Team Coaching Zone. Great to get you on.
Hi, Krister. It's great to be here. It's great to do this.
Good stuff. Well, everyone, I'm really excited about this interview. I've known Susan Coleman probably going back about 20 years now. And when I started graduate school at Columbia University, I was quickly introduced to Susan, who was sort of a big figure at Columbia University and in the United Nations. She had a great program on collaborative conflict resolution. And a number of us, those were really formative years. I remember one of my first experiences at the UN was going down and being an assistant to Susan while she was training diplomats and UN staff in collaborative negotiation skills for 3 days. And that really sort of launched a lot of my career. I ended up going on and doing a whole certificate in conflict resolution. I did a master's degree in organizational change, but I did this subspecialty in conflict resolution. Many years later, Susan and I taught together at Columbia and then joined in a partnership together with some other colleagues. So it's been really wonderful having her as a mentor, as a peer, as a colleague. And it's just been a really fun journey. And she has just this amazing background of 30 years of experience doing work all around the world. She's a coach and just a really great person. So Susan, great to have you on. Where do we find you today for this episode?
I am in my beautiful home in Garrison, New York, which is in the Hudson Highlands, about 50 miles north of New York City.
That's awesome. And I think you're in your little recording area because I see you've got your Peacebuilding podcast banner behind you or badge up there on the wall and looks good on you.
I do. I have my gobo, which I understand is the name for this thing. I had a friend who does all these installations in theater. And he came and he built me this sound studio because my house is kind of big and like echoey. So I'm in my little gobo, whatever.
Nice.
I don't know what gobo stands for, but that's
right. I have to check that out. Maybe I should get one of those myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, Susan, what I'd love to do is provide for the listeners a bit more of a background on you, and then I'll invite you to round that out. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
All right, that's good. All right, everyone. So we have a special guest today. We have Dr. Susan Coleman, who is the host of the Peacebuilding podcast. And she started this podcast, I believe it was last year, and it's grown out of a 3-decade career as a specialist in the field of conflict resolution and strategies to build common ground. She's a lawyer, mediator, large group facilitator, leadership, team and systems coach. She runs workshops in intercultural negotiation and communications and has been highly trained to intervene in complex systems at the individual, group, and organizational levels. She has worked with organizations, communities, and people worldwide on the ground in engagements in more than 27 countries in the Americas, Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. She designed and delivered the first negotiation and mediation program for the United Nations Secretariat, and along with Ellen Rader, the first certificate program in conflict resolution for Teachers College, Columbia University. Clients have included the United Nations worldwide, the government of Switzerland, the New York City Board of Education, American Express, the Colombian government, NASA, Columbia University, and the United States Department of State. She has an MPA from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, a JD from Hofstra School of Law, Law Review Honors, multiple postgraduate certifications from the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland and the Organization and Systems Development Center, and is an ICF certified coach. And as Susan mentioned, she resides in the Hudson Highlands, north of New York City, where she regularly contributes to creating a greener and more sustainable community. So boy, Susan, a lot in there in that short paragraph. But what else would you like the listeners to know here about you at the outset so we can, before we dive in and start exploring some of the art and science of team coaching today?
Wow, it's great hearing that read back to me. I think what I want to say is just that, well, I'm forever 45, but I'm not really. And
welcome to the club.
Yeah, right. And I've been thinking a lot recently about focus. I can't imagine where I get that idea from my friend and colleague Krister Lowe. And as I go into this next chapter of my professional life and personal life, I've been really thinking a lot about that and what I want to most contribute in the next decade. And so all those things are true, everything you read. And I imagine just really buckling down. This podcast that I'm doing, also, I want to say, I would not be doing it were it not for you, Krister. As you know, you really inspired me to get that going. I mean, you were focusing on teams, and one day I woke up and my feet hit the ground and I went, wow, I want to do this thing called the Peacebuilding Podcast, Strategies to Build Common Ground. I want to focus on intervening in large, complex systems to figure out how do we support collective leadership? How do we build and sustain collaboration in systems? How do we create principles and containers in which collaboration can thrive? And I know from my background, I've been beat up like all of us at different times in my professional career. And I think when I was first at, that whole chapter at Columbia, it was kind of like Camelot. Everything was so amazing and so many people got trained and so many people went around the world to teach conflict resolution. And then, life sets in and there was definitely, different kinds of competition that was going on, different kinds of power struggles. And I got wiser and I thought, wow, am I just being naive to focus on collaboration? And in fact, I think I'm more devoted and dedicated to it than ever, but a lot wiser, I think. And really, I think particularly our world is feeling so unstable at the moment in so many pockets, in so many places that it just feels like it needs bold, courageous stands. And I'm trying to get more courageous myself. I'm trying to just get more courageous.
Yeah. Well, when I think of sort of courage, I mean, you're definitely a person that comes to my mind. I know you've been recently in Afghanistan working with the women in the Afghan government. You've been in South Sudan. So you definitely have been putting yourself in places that are not totally safe. So I think you're really living those values and, being able to go from really nice places like Switzerland, working with the government of Switzerland to working with, the women in the Afghan government is I think really demonstrates a lot of your range and ability to work in a variety of environments, including corporate and, so it's really good stuff. But anyways, I'm excited that I've been a little bit of inspiration for you about starting your own podcast, but I think the balance still tips in your favor in terms of how much inspiration you had on me over the years. But I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey, Susan, into how you got into the field of conflict resolution, consensus building. I think we'll link that up a bit to your coaching work later, but tell us a little bit about the journey.
Wow. I let me think about this. I hadn't really thought about this question, but of course I know you asked this question. The short answer is that I started my professional career I set up a foundation called the North Star Fund, which still exists to this day. It was the first thing I did coming out of college, and I did some pretty cool building common ground there. In fact, creating a new kind of structure for giving money to organizations that were doing important work, and that was by developing a community funding board that actually had control over how the assets were given out. I traveled around the city. I talked to all these organizers. So that was one of my first things that I did. And I was really focused on international development. I lived in Colombia for a while, which actually definitely influenced me when I was choosing to go to Afghanistan now, because I remember then Colombia was not an easy place. People were getting kidnapped a lot. And I'm grateful to my mother at the time, because people were all saying to her, "Are you crazy to let your daughter go down there?" And she was not just cavalier. She was educated about the whole thing. She had a good Colombian friend, and she was supportive of me to go and do that. And it was an amazing, amazing experience.
I know you've had that experience as a mother yourself, because you have some really bold kids that are doing some amazing stuff out in the world.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Back at you, right? So.
Oh my gosh. My son finally, he's been in Nepal and he was going to climb. He found a peak. He's a mountaineer. He's very skilled. He's 21. He's led a lot of groups into the backcountry and in the wilderness in Alaska. But this time he kind of pushed the envelope with me and gives me an unnamed peak on Google Earth and says, I'm going by myself and I'm going to go and climb that, and speaks Nepali fluently. So I knew he'd be, yeah, he learned it really fast. It's amazing. He was in a semester there, but he kind of surprised everybody how quickly he picked up the language. But anyway, the last couple of days have been kind of agonizing, frankly, because I really I knew he was on that, or I thought he was on that mountain. And I was really, really uncomfortable. But I just heard from him yesterday. The phone rang and I saw it coming from Nepal, and I thought, it's either going to be the chief of police of some unknown place in Western Nepal who's going to tell me that they've, God, it was just like horrible, or it's going to be him, and it was him. So anyway, instant karma, whatever. He also is an adventurous soul. And so is my daughter. But anyway, getting back to, let's see. I then, the only thing I was of an age that I was raised in. I was supposed to be a corporate wife, Krista, really. I grew up in a pretty affluent home. It was a pretty patriarchal home in a lot of ways. I was very privileged economically. I was not so privileged gender-wise. I grew up in a place where my power was definitely dimmed down by, so many subtle and not so subtle messages about men being more important than I was, but given a great education. But the only thing I knew professionally when I realized in college that, wow, I actually don't want to be a corporate wife. As a matter of fact, and I actually need to figure out how to support myself, make a living, be a professional in the world, whatever. And the only thing I really knew was my dad, who'd been a corporate lawyer in the city for Davis Polk Wardwell, which was a really well-known firm. And so I did what I knew and went to law school and applied, didn't have a college transcript because I'd gone to this hippie college named Hampshire College. It was a cool place, but we didn't get grades. And, and did the whole law school thing for a while, became a commercial litigator. I think, wow, that was interesting. And
talk about competition, right?
Oh my gosh, I have memories of sitting around those corporate board tables, with the men all smoking cigars and getting. By the way, I think cigars make you kind of high. I never knew that until I watched them, but they'd all get kind of like fuzzy.
Part of their strategy to soften the other side, right?
Yeah. I do have this really funny memory of it being my birthday and us all sitting around and doing something very serious. So I was with we were doing some preparation for some litigation, some commercial litigation. And it was just amazing watching that process because it's like, one incredibly nasty letter responded to another incredibly nasty letter, to just these power struggles that go on. And my colleagues and I would laugh and say, we never would sue anybody. But, every time we were part of one of these lawsuits, we'd see another, wing go on our senior partner's house because they were billing such incredible amounts to their clients. But anyway, one day I'm sitting around, all these guys and me and, whatever, doing our preparation. And my friend, I don't know why I'm telling you this story, but it's my birthday. My friend decides to send me a singing telegram, a gorilla.
Okay. Shows up in the room.
Shows up in the room and sings me happy birthday. And the partners were not, they were not very happy about it. I thought
they can
really
smoke
funny.
Their cigars, but you can't have a singing gorilla.
I know. And it was like one of those experiences where I thought, it was one of a number where I thought, okay, this is a little bit not going to be my place ultimately. Another one was when, I remember one partner telling me when I had to go somewhere instead of filing this brief, and I was really responsible about it. I gave them plenty of warning. It was a personal thing I had to do. It was really important to me. And I remember the partner looking at me and just saying, we don't do personal here.
Wow.
And me thinking, okay, well, that's not going to work for me. And
this is like 1980s or 90s or?
80s. And so then I left. And, it's hard to get out of there. It's hard for people in law jobs to get out of there because they can't figure out what to do. But I did. So I went back to school. I went to the Kennedy School of Government. I'd had a previous focus on international development when I was at Hampshire. I'd actually done original research in Mexico that I still think, wow, I was like traipsing around these barrios of Mexico doing something on population issues, the politics of population control in Mexico. Long ago. And so I went to the Kennedy School at Harvard and figured I would focus on international development and got connected there to the program on negotiation, which was coming out of Harvard Law School. And, it's the origins of Getting to Yes and Roger Fisher. And I just got caught right up in it. It was like somehow it really grabbed me the way it's grabbed a lot of people. It combined my focus. I'd been, done a lot of my own therapy at that point, which is an incredible education that I'd had in my own inner psychology. I found negotiation stuff to be a really great antidote to this litigation system that I found
win-win integrative.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It just was like, so like that win-lose kind of litigation system, the adversarial system is just, it's not bad in that, if you think about societies where there is no system of rights and rules,
right? They
don't have any
advocacy.
They need some kind of container like that. But then this container for us, the rights rules container, has just gotten crazy in the United States and around the world. I mean, what, 3/4 of the world's lawyers are in New York City or something, something crazy like that. And then negotiation also was international. I don't know. There was just a lot of components and I seemed to excel at it. I was doing these courses with Jim Sebanius and, oh my God, I just forgot his name. Well, Roger Fisher and some other people at the Harvard, MIT, that whole world. And I was really doing well. I got awards. I just seemed to excel at it somehow. And so then I told them, I remember telling Larry Susskind at MIT, I remember saying, I am going to do intercultural negotiations, and him saying something like, there is no such thing. And I said, well,
now there is.
Now there is, because that's what I'm going to do.
I got to fill the gap. Yes.
Yeah. And I came to New York, and sure enough, I found Ellen Rader, who'd been doing intercultural negotiations for, I don't know, like about 10 years at that point. And she'd made it up, and she was traveling around the world.
That's so interesting. I mean, I think there's a thing there that when we find a passion around something and we commit to it, just people appear and things start to happen, it's really a mystical thing. But anyways, yeah, it's interesting.
No, it's really interesting. When you get my therapist of long ago always used to say, clarity is everything, and I think there is something about that when you get clear about what it is that you're trying to manifest, boom, something
living in alignment with your values, your calling, or whatever, your true north, or whatever. Yeah. So you found Ellen Rader, and
and Ellen, as you know, I think you know Ellen. She's like just she was an amazing person to collaborate with. She was my first teacher in this field, and then she became my business partner, and we were in partnership together for a good long time. We formed Coleman Rader International, and that's how we started the program the certificate program at Columbia. And it was when I was in that constellation that I created the program at the United Nations in conflict resolution. And when we wove culture into everything that we were doing. It was, it was not just collaborative negotiation skills. It was intercultural negotiation skills, which was really true to my heart. And still, I was influenced long ago by a book by Riane Eisler called The Chalice and the Blade, that she's an anthropologist, and she wrote that book really documents, she will say that the history of human life on Earth is basically the history of models of domination and models of partnership. And, Bill Urey later on in his book, Getting to Peace, also says the same thing, that it's only been in the last, I don't know if it's 5,000 years, 10,000 years, that we've had this system of what I might call patriarchy, coercion, competition. I mean, it is the time that we've been mostly, of our modern human life on the planet. But before that, there's a lot of evidence of human beings living in partnership with each other.
Yeah.
Of course, there's a lot more space. And anyway, for a lot of reasons.
It's actually, from what I understand from evolutionary psychology, the majority of our evolution, we lived in, relatively small bands or tribes, and there was a reverse dominance hierarchy, where actually it was more collaborative, and when people would get too far out of line, taking up too much leadership, the group kind of smacked them back into order, from what I understand from evolutionary psychology. But
interesting. That's what you mean by reverse dominance hierarchy?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't as hierarchical as we might have assumed.
Yeah.
I guess I think more of like Native American sort of circles and, consensus building. I think that was actually more of our evolution. But as we moved into agrarian and industrial societies, we needed new forms of organization. But yeah.
Yeah. And that we're very, ended up being very hierarchical. And now it's interesting, now looking at what's happening in organizations and systems. I know you just interviewed somebody who's doing holacracy, and I just interviewed Sandra Janoff, who does future search. Just the move towards systems thinking, whole systems thinking, and a more collaborative way of experiencing organizations. So anyway, let me see.
Yeah, which I think was part of your journey, right? So you kind of got more into the negotiation training, intercultural stuff, but then you moved your way into more systems work. So, and I think that eventually led to coaching, but why don't you connect some of those dots?
Okay, yeah. So I remember, I had done so much training. I had this great training design, which I still use and I still love it and I still deliver it. But I was doing a lot of it. And I was very aware, I think like you have been aware in your journey, that a lot of these things are systemic. You can't just intervene.
Right. Training is insufficient. Necessary, but insufficient. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not to say that individual eurekas aren't really powerful for people. They really are. And I don't want to.
Well, had I not taken your class, I wouldn't have gone into the way I went in terms of my career. I mean, I saw what I saw in your course at Columbia, which was taught by one of our colleagues, Sandra Hayes, was a model of adult learning, of experiential learning, of tapping into a whole nother side of myself around emotions and other things that just and skills. I think it was way beyond cognitive knowledge, right? And that for me was sort of a tipping point that led to a whole cascade effect that, I don't think I'd be a team coach today had I not had those early experiences. So, it's interesting. I know you and I have had some interesting conversations around the limits of training. And yet, depending on how we measure impact, if we look at it at the individual level of analysis, it can be really transformative. It just seems to fall short of having sort of a system effect unless it's coupled with another more systemic intervention or change effort, right?
Well, and I found for myself that I am forever interested in groups and the way groups the way groups operate, and also that I think that some of the most powerful learning that I've had have been in the context of relationships and groups. I think the way I've grown the most have been in the context of relationships and groups. And so I got drawn to the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland, to John Carter specifically at that point, who became my mentor, and did their organization and systems design program, which was an amazing program that, happened over the course of 18 months. It was 9 sessions. I mean, it's amazing. Sometimes I don't think these programs exist anymore because everybody wants to do everything in a nanosecond. But, we had time to really dig down deep. And as John said, this is not a personal development program, but let's just say there's a big personal development component. And there was, there was a lot about seeing yourself clearly so that you could show up in organizational systems with people and not make too much noise with your own projections and your own stuff and all the stuff that gets triggered, when you're engaged with people. So that program was amazingly powerful for me. And I continued to do my learning with them. I did their working with groups. And then I did the international coaching program, which was my first jump into coaching. And I remember John, he did that program with Dorothy Siminovich. And I remember him kind of
on the podcast. And we had Dorothy come in as a team coach for us, our partnership group. That's right. 3 years ago.
Yeah, and I remember John kind of being disgruntled about the whole coaching thing, saying, oh, my God, we've been doing this stuff for years, and now they're calling it coaching.
I know. I get a lot of that generation on my podcast who is kind of poo-pooing the whole coaching thing. But then they're using the label, too, I think, begrudgingly. Well, because that's where the market has shifted.
I like the label because I'm a mediator and I'm a coach. And I think simply when I'm working with a group, there are groups that, are really trying to put out fires. And then there are groups that are trying to go higher. And I think the mediator hat is putting out the fires. The coach hat is let's go higher. Let's see how high we can go here together. And lots of times they go together. Lots of times groups that have, we have that. I know you've seen that quote. What is it? The Albert Einstein quote about conflict is, I can't believe I can't remember what it is.
You mean the consciousness quote? That no problem can be solved at the same level of consciousness.
Well, one of those, and also just that lots of times if you use conflict well, you actually can use it as an opportunity to reshape things and actually go higher. Yeah. And
I think my observation of doing a lot of work in the conflict resolution world is that conflict is usually an indicator that an underlying change is needed in something in the system.
Yeah.
And that could be an individual, a pair, a team, a larger organization, but conflict is usually an indicator that some growth or fundamental change is not happening or some human needs are not being met. And, that's what's giving rise to the conflict.
Yeah, it's a developmental opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah, there you go.
You could put it like that.
But to summarize, you kind of have developed over your career, it sounds like, one-on-one work, working with pairs, mediation, et cetera, working with groups and teams, and then large systems, because I know you do some large group methods like future search and open space. You've done some really, interesting work around the world with that. So I think, part of, I guess one thing that's wonderful about your background is you're able to work at all levels of system. Yeah. And I just interviewed Richard Boyatzis recently and really looking at some of his work around intentional change theory. And he talks about how change has to be multi-level because it has to be able to work at levels. And I think for team coaches, we need to be able to work with individuals. We need to be able to work with dyads. We need to work with the team, but we also need to be able to work with the team in relationship to the larger context, right? Which is a big
as we know,
of,
teams exist. Teams exist inside systems, right. And I mean, this isn't a team situation I'm going to refer to, but But when I was doing some work in Cyprus a long time ago, I was just really aware of how the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots, they really wanted actually to come together because they had been neighbors and they were kind of tired of the conflict. The conflict had been going on for generations. They were sick of it. But every time they actually came together, somebody from the outside, from Greece or Turkey, came in and messed it up. And, the same thing happens inside organizational systems. A team can actually come together and be quite a powerful cohort. But then if the system outside of it is undermining it constantly, it's difficult. It's difficult to hold on to that collaboration. So
I think you see that in a lot of the team coaching models, Peter Hawkins' framework. I had Gordon Curfey on the podcast recently, and even Ruth Wagaman's work, just looking at the organizational context and support is a big one, right? And I think that's sort of a danger point for a lot of us team coaches, because just kind of grappling with the team and helping the team get its act together, it's easy to lose sight of the team's relationship to the larger system.
What I like about the Gestalt framework is that, my systems training is such that, Gestalt uses the concept of figure ground. And when you identify this kind of figure ground, simply put, is kind of like there's the forest and then there's the tree sticking up in the forest. And, what are you going to focus on? And creating energy around what it is that you want to focus on that's important to that system. But the Gestalt training is such that once you identify what the figure is that's interesting to you and to the client and to you, and there's energy around it, you can work that figure at any level of system. You can work it at individuals, you can work it with the teams, you can work it with the whole system. And sometimes, ideally, you work it with all levels in different ways.
Cool. So, Susan, I'm sure we could burn the whole episode just chatting, but I'd love to get a little bit for the listeners out there, a story or two in here. And again, I think we could probably fill up a whole season just getting into stories of your case examples, from companies to, I know you did some great work with in northern Iraq with the Kurds, and but I know recently you had this just really incredible trip first to Tajikistan and then to Kabul, working with the women in the Afghan government. And I don't know if that's a good case or not. I think it's a really interesting one. I think it also, one of the themes I know about you is you've really moved a lot more into women's leadership development and women's development. So that may be a good story that covers a number of themes that I think is relevant for you now in your practice.
I'd love to talk about it because I actually meant to talk about it on my podcast and I haven't gotten around to it yet. So I really look forward to
an appetizer for those.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Actually, you know what, Susan, just before we get into that, do you want to say just a few words about, how you think about team coaching and how does that fit into the range of things that you bring when you're doing work in a system?
Yeah. So I'm relatively new to team coaching, but I have definitely been using it and pushing clients to use it more and more because, as we know, lots of clients just want to do these away days, one-off things, and change really happens over time. So, I can actually talk about it in the context of this intervention because I used it. Cool. I used the concepts quite a bit, and maybe that will. I'm doing a couple of team coaching engagements myself right now, but which are, one is with a co-op board, another one's with another UN organization. But I think, I can maybe, because I'd love to talk about Afghanistan, maybe I'll just morph it in.
Yeah, we'll blend them together. That sounds good. So give us the backstory on that project.
Well, first, I guess I can say that, in terms of building and sustaining collaboration, which has been kind of my professional work, and then being the host of the Peacebuilding podcast, to me, probably the most powerful peace-building intervention that could happen on the planet is women's empowerment. Is there really being partnership between men and women on the planet? I think things have been really out of balance, and that really could shift things in powerful ways. I'm not the only one who thinks that. So the president, His Excellency, the President of Afghanistan, and Her Excellency, the First Lady specifically, have been very, very important, interested in empowering women in Afghanistan. And UN Women is in Afghanistan. It's probably one of the larger UN women organizations, I believe. And I think it's probably because other people agree with me that if you start empowering women, you can create a more collaborative, less conflictual society. But anyway, this work was with the senior ministers, senior female civil servants is the way they articulated it. And we had two cohorts. One cohort was about, 18 people, and they were for the highest level people. And then there was the next cohort was like for maybe 25 women just beneath them. And
from what I understand, that's about all of the women in the government, right?
It is,
so
and
about 40 or 50 women altogether.
This came about because, and I don't, I want to be a little, I have to be a little respectful of my client, but, it's not easy, as you might imagine, not easy being a woman in the Afghan government, in Afghanistan, period.
Well, actually, I think there's death threats, right, for those women.
Constantly. And so I think this came about just because there was a perceived need to do skill building specifically, and also to actually really build this cohort as a team, quote unquote. They are not an intact team, but they are essentially a team. Well, before this program, they actually were not as much of a team as I think they are now. It's just one of some of what I think happened that I think was really important. So,
but they have a common shared purpose around elevating the status of women in Afghan society, and that's sort of kind of a common purpose for them.
Fiercely so. In fact, they call themselves the fierce mothers of Afghanistan. Wow. And, if
That's
Afghanistan, right? If, Afghanistan has created the Mujahideen and the Taliban, it's also created these women. And these women are really, I think one of the things that really stood out to me is that I went in there and I think everybody, they and we assume, poor Afghan women, and there's reasons to feel sorry for them, but they are somehow not as developed, quote unquote, as we are, or whatever you might say. These women are so incredibly powerful and have so much integrity and so much intelligence that I was really blown away and very humbled by them. And they, I think, are so clearly focused on improving the lives of women in Afghanistan. And they have to do some seriously dangerous things. I noticed for myself, I just want to give a little bit of the context for me coming into Afghanistan and would it be interesting to talk about some of my own challenges? Yeah. Because right from the get-go, it's a little bit like, really, am I going to do this? Is this, some people around me were saying, Susan, you're crazy to go into Afghanistan. I should say this program was in two parts. The first part was in Tajikistan. We met there because there were 4 consultants involved and coach consultants, some of them called themselves coaches, some called themselves consultants. But one of them was a former British ambassador, and he was like, forget it, I'm not going into Kabul. And they so wanted him because he does public speaking and he does it. His name is Charles Crawford. He does an incredible job on public speaking. And there's one woman in the Afghan government, Darukhshan Ismati, who is she's really the mastermind of all of this. She's this really very spunky young woman who just really pulled this whole thing together. It's interesting and she works for the president of Afghanistan. And she had met Charles and she knew how powerful he was as a teacher of public speaking. And these women are, they're often doing public speaking engagements. And, the Minister of Women's Affairs, for instance, she's such an amazing, a humble woman who is regularly having to stand up and give speeches about about women's rights, about things like, how to talk to men, how to convince your brothers and your fathers, to do things differently with their daughters, and regularly gets death threats and has to, a lot of these women have bodyguards. There's bombs going off around, car bombs. It's a big thing. And also there's the issue of people getting kidnapped. Many of these women, the more I heard about their personal stories, there's just a constant level of security issues that are bombarding them. And so for me, as somebody going into Afghanistan, I had to deal with a lot of personal anxiety myself.
Well, I think, where that's sort of a parallel, I think probably for all team coaches, and yours is kind of more of an extreme case, I guess you could say, is, how do we manage ourselves as a team coach, right? We enter into environments, contexts we've never been before, or clients we never worked with. We have to kind of take up the spirit of being a team coach and self-manage, our own fears and anxieties and all that, right?
Yeah. And, so for me, the first thing is, coming in, being in Dubai, and then coming into the gate where I was going to Kabul, putting on the headscarf, because I knew I had to be covered anytime I was in a public place. Just that experience alone of covering myself was, and suddenly being in a place where I was one of the few women in that waiting area. And I was just constantly a little bit afraid. A little bit afraid that I didn't know, people said, oh, there are Taliban spies everywhere. How much would somebody want to kidnap somebody like me? There's a lot of kidnapping that's going on in Afghanistan. And I really want to say I was very appreciative of the UN and how much they have created a container where certain work can happen. The UN gets a lot of grief a lot of times, but wow, they have an incredible security system going on in Afghanistan where I just felt like, from these bulletproof cars that we were in, you can hardly open the door because, it's so heavy. You come into the UN compound and you have to go through this maze zigzag because, they're trying to prevent car bombs. And then I walk into, I was staying in a container, which is, and I walked into my container. The first thing I see is a big sign on the wall that says, in case of mortar attack, do not panic.
Wow.
It's like, great.
You can see how your ability to, take up your role as a facilitator and coach in that setting is moderated by that anxiety and that context. Yeah.
And then coming into the hotel, we did this in a hotel, the Serena Hotel in Kabul, and I have never, ever been through that level of security. It was just extraordinary. Just, security check after security check, body check, security check, everything over and over and over again before you actually get into the hotel. And, a postscript is I later learned I was on the UN compound in Kabul and I was at the Serena Hotel delivering this program. And then I was on Jalalabad Road which is the main road in Kabul. And I later find out that those are the three most dangerous places in Kabul. Those are the places where all the attacks have occurred.
It's probably good that you found that out after.
Yeah, like, oh, great. Yeah. That's really great. So it was, again, I just going back to my mom and Colombia, I was just grateful that I'd had that in my background because I knew I was going to grow tremendously from doing this. I also knew that I could bring a lot of sisterhood to these women, and as well as intelligence, and as well as kind of a global view of what they were trying to accomplish. And
so you found yourself getting back centered and back in yourself, your body, and centered, present.
So, one of the, I guess to talk about the design, this was a multifaceted design. It was not specifically a team coaching design, although, went in with very specific intentions about building this cohort of women so that they could work together more effectively as a group for the advancement of women in Afghanistan. So it involved, as I said, it involved a lot, maybe too many things. And it was kind of like you just do what you can, but it was 4 different consultants with 4 different skill level material and all of that. And I was the person that was somehow having to pull it all together and make it make sense.
You needed to be the team coach for the team of facilitators.
Yeah. I was having to pull together that team of interveners. So the public speaking, part was really powerful. There's nothing. Just give us a little bit of context.
Was this like a 5-day program, 10-day program? Was it a mix of training or coaching, or what were you actually doing? Yeah.
Yeah. So week one, well, actually, the first part was in Tajikistan, and there was 3 days for cohort A and 3 days for cohort B. And again, I just want to talk the reality of doing things in these places. We had to translate everything into Dari. And, that Dari
cuts
is
everything in half in terms of the time you have.
Oh my gosh. It's just enormous. I mean, all your PowerPoints, everything, and the UN women, people who were supporting, they were all men who were supporting us. They were totally lovely, but it was a lot, it's a big effort to just have that translation happen. And so the first one was 3 days and 3 days. The other in Tajikistan, it was a repeat
and just in
program.
Those in Tajikistan, you're doing a mix of what were you doing there? You had
That was more of a training. It was first public speaking. It was diplomatic protocol, which was really important for a lot of these people because they're having to deal with a lot of international visitors and they're very high level ministers. So it was that. It was negotiation and conflict resolution. We did a bunch of that, and then the public speaking component, and then there was just me building connections with everybody, and I did that really by, like, for instance, going to the local mall and going shopping with them. It was really, really fun just hanging out with this whole group of women, all, that were just from looked like a totally different world from me. But we bonded in so many ways, in so many very deep ways. And so that was, and then the other logistical thing that happens in these programs is, of course, everything is so difficult for people. They couldn't get the second cohort couldn't get their visas to get out of Afghanistan to come to Tajikistan because there's some new person in Tajikistan, blah, 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 blah. So I actually missed the second cohort altogether because I had to come back to New York and deliver another program. And I didn't get to even see them until I got to Kabul a month later.
Wow.
So then a month later,
so just to recap, so the work in Tajikistan was kind of a training, come together as a group, start to build some of the connections, really lay some groundwork for some deeper work, it sounds like.
Yeah, and everything I was doing was trying to build this group. Everything I was saying, the commentary around collective leadership, the exercises that I was doing with them. It was really interesting, Krister. You taught me the count to 21 exercise. Yeah. First, I've never had a group not be able to do that. This group, and I don't know if it was language or what, we could not do it.
Just for the listeners out there, this is a great exercise you can do with a team or a group. We've done it with really large groups as well, where you have everybody stand in a circle and count to 21, but in a random order. So people around the circle kind of have to shout out a number sequentially 1 to 21, but if two people say the number at the same time, you have to go back to the beginning. And it's a really powerful exercise in collective intelligence, and you have to make some interventions as a coach oftentimes for the group to be able to do it. But this is the first group. I know you did in West Africa with our colleague Jason, like 150 people.
150 people did this, pulled this off.
But you couldn't get it in Afghanistan.
I could not get it to happen. And at some point it was like, how many times are we going to try this?
Right. Did they get better, though, with the coaching intervention? Because you kind of slow people down, get them breathing, actually have them turn facing out and close their eyes and, slow down a bit and get in their bodies and sense the space. But
I had never done it, to be fair. I had never done it where I was actually having to deal with translation.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. That was bold, though, for you to give that a crack.
Yeah.
Did you see an increase in their performance on the exercise?
Yeah, and I think they were trying to work the system.
They're trying to problem solve it. Yeah,
they were trying to problem solve it. Yeah, and I think it had an impact. Nonetheless, I think it had an impact on them simply feeling themselves as a cohort, feeling themselves as a team, not getting out of their heads, getting into their breath, getting their feet on the ground, and breathing into their space together. And we did a lot more. The second when we were in Kabul, we did a lot more of that kind of activity because I had a coach with me who was just amazing, and we did a lot of nonverbal or just interactive kind of body experiences that I think helped people connect. But this was the first, and I think they got the idea, and I think they really there'd been here. Let me just give a little context about this, which is that President Ghani is the president of Afghanistan, and I guess he won by a slight margin, and he basically is in a power sharing arrangement with another leader who's also in the government. And so a lot of these women are sort of broken down by allegiances to these two parts of the government. And I think there's a certain amount of tension and I don't want to get into it too much here, but it's, just difficulty coming together. And then I will say that in general, I think women worldwide have difficulty coming together. I think people think sometimes, oh, women are so collaborative. Not so much. Women are undermining each other all the time, and in subtle and not so subtle ways. And these women were no exception. They were doing a lot of things that were not really supportive of coming together as sisters with a very common purpose. And they do have a common purpose, which is to really empower women in Afghanistan.
So those were some dynamics that were emerging.
Yeah, those were some that were right away from the get-go. So some of this conversation, count to 21, such a simple exercise, but simply bringing in the idea of actually, can you feel yourself as a group? Can you breathe together as a group? Can you sense each other as a group? Were pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I've noticed as a team coach is really most people have never had the experience of actually, maybe in sports teams or other places of really, when you get into flow or feeling connected. I think we don't have too many of those experiences in our emotional memory. So I think Count to 21 is for a lot of teams and groups one of the first times I think they've experienced collective intelligence, and it's super powerful. But I think it's something we could push the envelope on and do more to keep having that experience, because if it starts to become more frequent, then it's something that maybe we get in our DNA and we can start to go back to and start to create more of that.
And I'm just, the more work I do in the field and with myself, I just am I think embodied experiences are so powerful. And I think I get in the course of doing that simple exercise, I was giving these women who are all highly educated, highly brainiac women, permission. They're highly brainiac women, and they're also deeply feeling women. They're very deeply passionate, emotional, very passionate people. And I was giving them permission to get out of their heads more and really, and get into a more embodied experience.
And what was possible for them when you did that? Or what emerged?
I think the language if I think about it, in that first session in Tajikistan, I think the language started to change, and many women started to talk to each other about the importance of really coming together and supporting each other. And I can't say that I was tracking it all because, of course, it was in Dari with direct translation. But I was tracking a lot of it, and I was trying to track the different divisions in the group and where the different power struggles were going on. But I definitely was picking up the increased amount of focus on how do they come together, and and then of course I was feeding into that, not just how do you come together to better serve the men in power in Afghanistan, but how can you, and everything I was saying, how can you be the fierce mothers of Afghanistan and be a model not just for Afghanistan but for the world? And I think that was happening in Tajikistan.
Got chills thinking about that. Yeah, talk about a compelling purpose.
Yeah, and I think I was wanting them to see themselves a little differently as not one down, but actually as very, very powerful. Yeah, because also the other thing about these women, I will say, corruption is probably the biggest problem in Afghanistan. It's a huge, huge problem that's affecting everything. And these women are, as far as I could tell, the embodiment of integrity. I mean, for instance, we come into Tajikistan, and I was there for just part of the second cohort's arrival. I was there to greet them and to have dinner with them. And the second cohort, they had all asked the hotel if they could actually share rooms so that they could not use up so much of their DSA, their daily subsistence allowance, so that they could give it to charity to support other women.
Wow.
And, it's like, geez, most people take that extra DSA and they pocket it and they make, not these women. They absolutely wanted to give it to other women. And,
Very
the
selfless.
women, really selfless and really, really mission-driven people.
So Susan, in the second wave of work you did in Kabul, you were out there for a couple of weeks, or
it was the same thing. It was 3 days and 3 days. It was a 6-day total with each group. And that group was more like what you might think. Well, it had training components, and then it had more like real coaching components. Training components were, I did the NBI with them, which you
NBI,
were
Thinking Preferences Assessment. Yep.
Yeah, which they loved that, and it was it's such a great assessment.
We had to translate it into Dari, right?
Oh my God. And they just loved it because, it is very intuitive and it's got some good imagery. And so some of the language barriers didn't really matter. But of course, like people often do with these assessments, they started taking it way too seriously.
Take it too literally, or drink the Kool-Aid on it.
Yeah, now I know who I am. It's like,
right.
It's like
it's a little sliver of who you are.
One sliver, just one suggestion. We also did a whole thing on transformational leadership and using that for systems change. That was honestly a little heavy. It was good, but I didn't do that component. But it was a little too intellectual. These women wanted more experiential types of interventions. I worked alongside this woman, Shipe Malushi, who's a coach, and she's been working in throughout Central Asia for a long time. She was just awesome. She was so powerful. First of all, she comes in, she looks like this shaman, and she was very comfortable. For instance, we would start our days doing things like having some woman come forward and do a Quranic verse. And I wouldn't have really known how to do that and to build rapport with a group like that, but she had no problem. The more the pieces that I did, aside from pull the whole thing together, was and from doing the NBI, I ran the NBI portion, was I did my last day with both groups. I did a really moving piece on finding our voices and then leading together. And the finding our voices part was, using a kind of coaching framework to talk about our river of life experiences, what have been the challenges and what have been the supports that have made us into the leaders that we are today. And I decided to do a kind of felt like a bold move on my part to really share some of my personal experiences. Now, I grew up, as I said, in a pretty patriarchal family setting where it was explicitly and not explicitly communicated that I was a second-class citizen. And I had a brother who was 5 years older than me that I am still processing some of the difficulties of living with somebody who was so empowered and so really was very abusive to me in many, many ways and was authorized to be abusive to me in many, many ways. I decided to, in a confidential setting, we kicked all the men out, which all the translators were men, and the UN Afghan representative, UN Afghanistan, UN women people were men. We kicked them all out. They were supportive of that, but they kept wanting to come back in and listen to us. I said, no, you have to get out of here. You have to get out of here. And I really shared my personal story, and in a pretty deep way. And it was a choice, a use of self of instrument. Like, what can I share here that's going to actually open the door? And it totally opened the door in a big way with people. They started, because people are really afraid to share with each other because for obvious reasons. There's a lot of security issues and a lot of reasons that distrust is low. Anyway, they really
talk about creating psychological safety, right? I think there's something there powerful, I think, just for us as team coaches around having to model the change that we're hoping that the group will take up. But, by you putting yourself out there, I mean, we hear a lot of buzz about psychological safety, but how do you build psychological safety? Well, you have to take some risk. In order to take some risk, we have to be vulnerable, right? And so at some point, somebody needs to start that. And so kudos to you for taking a bold move there. Because, you could imagine in that environment, people could have just responded and not responded to that, or been like, well, thank you for sharing that, Susan, and stopping there and not jumping in themselves. So,
well, and some of this, is moving into a material that just isn't talked about, and taboo. Is taboo. And I knew that. And yet it was part of my story. And the other thing about it that was really powerful for them was that I was a privileged, highly educated American woman. And they were like, wow, that happened to you. That happens in the United States. That's what happens to us all the time.
Wow.
We can't believe that you have had similar experiences. And I think that was a really, really powerful moment for everybody.
No, that just touched my heart as you were saying that. Yeah,
because of course then I shared with them about, how much my story isn't particularly unique. It's really shared by a lot of women around the world, in the United States for sure. So anyway, that was the morning. We had a really beautiful, sacred kind of environment. I had candles. I had a circle of chairs. I had really beautiful music. And so that's what we did the first morning, is sort of that river of life journey of what's made us strong. And then we moved from that into, actually, we did some more public speaking, because it was, again, the public speaking part is so much, you take your personal journey, your personal voice. Finding voice is such a big deal for women in general. I mean, it's a big deal for a lot of people, but for women in general, in terms of women's leadership, it's huge. It's like, can we, what are the ways that we stifle our voices, and how do we actually stand into our stories? And so I had them do more public speaking, and they do so much of it, and figuring out, it's dicey. Like, how do you stand up and do a 5-minute speech about how do you talk to your fathers and brothers and uncles about women's empowerment? How do you talk about the importance of, women's empowerment? How do you talk about a vision for Afghanistan where women are equal partners to men? In an environment where, everybody is, a lot of women are wearing burqas, everyone's covered. And women, like one woman said to me, women are nothing in Afghanistan. They're treated like and I felt that there's a lot of, just really, just very, they're not just second-class citizens. Many women are like third, fourth, fifth, slaves, many women. And then there are many women that are very empowered by their parents, and, so we did that. And then we moved into a World Cafe style strategic planning, if you will, process where I had them thinking, I asked some really team coachy kind of questions. One question was, what can we, the fierce mothers of Afghanistan, uniquely do that the world of tomorrow needs,
Oh, great question.
How do we keep ourselves smaller than we really are? What divides us, and how can we overcome that division? Things like that. And then moved them into, from that kind of divergence into an integration of, okay, what are some key next steps over the next 3 months that we as a team, we as a cohort, whatever we want to call ourselves, can do working together to improve our community and our strength together and our support for each other. And they were so excited by this. They were like seriously excited by it.
Well, it sounds like you laid the groundwork for all that over the work in Tajikistan and the days leading up to this and the sharing that you did that morning. So
right. And then the thing that's so cool about technology is that, we do this whole thing, this divergence to integration, and all the integration is up on the flip charts, and we're doing the sticky dots so they can see which ones are most important to them. And then, of course, everybody has cell phones, and they're taking photographs, and immediately they're putting it on Viber. They have a Viber community. So, and ever since then, I'm part of that Viber group. Of course, I can't understand any of it because it's in Dari, but they're regularly communicating with each other,
So and using technology to support ongoing teaming, because they don't work as an intact team, right? So
they do not work as an intact team, but Afghanistan, Kabul's a small place, and it's a small community of women in the government.
They have a lot of contact,
They have a lot, and hopefully now much more supportive contact as a result of this program.
And how are you supporting them? Are you supporting them in an ongoing way?
Well, there's no budget for that, as you might imagine. What I'm hoping, and I in my follow-up actions, I really am hoping they will go for longer-term coaching interventions with this cohort, and I think they might. Both team coaching for this group, for the high-level group, and the next level, probably more for the senior ministers, I think, probably for that level, because it's so amazing, when you can work at that level, how much it can permeate through the whole
it's huge. System. That's great stuff, Susan.
And then I think there's more. I think they'll support more individual coaching of each of which I probably wouldn't do that, but Shipe would probably do that as well as. So there's some really talented people, coaches in Afghanistan that could be
Right.
great to do that kind of work.
What I love about your story is kind of working across levels from the individual to the team to the larger context. I mean, and I guess that's what I think of team coaching a lot is a meta competency that brings training, that brings facilitation, that brings coaching. And you don't have to do it a cookie cutter way. It's a really nice customized intervention here. And there's some really just lovely themes here just about gender and about just sort of the connection to the larger world, right? And that, a powerful group of women coming together as a team in Afghanistan might not only have a huge transformative impact on that society, but have ripple effects across the world, right? And that story, coming out on this podcast or your podcast, I mean, it inspires people out there. And I think that's one of the big things I'm taking away from today is, just thinking bigger and bolder, and as team coaches, wonderful to have people like you out helping the women of the Afghan government step up to their role and have some support around that. What a beautiful thing to be involved in. What more meaningful work could you do? And I know you've had some great work, and you've been flying around in helicopters in South Sudan recently, and in Iraq, and you've been to a lot of really interesting places. But this is a very, very touching story.
I think this is also probably the most touching because I am so passionate about empowering women and using coaching to empower women, using group methodologies to empower women.
I think you've got a niche there.
Yeah.
Focus. You're mentioning focus earlier.
What's happening with the podcast too, I'm noticing I just interviewed a woman who's on President Santos's leadership team in Colombia, the peace process, the leadership team to support the peace process in Colombia. And what I am noticing is, is the ways that we can connect women peace builders all over the world. Like these women in Afghanistan were really interested in being connected to her in Colombia, and then this woman in Northern Ireland. And so I'm beginning to think, this podcast that I'm doing actually can be a forum for connecting women's voices in that way, because so again, not a specific team, but there are boundaries around these groups that can be drawn to make them stronger.
Definitely. Well, I like to say, Susan, we're, burning daylight again on the podcast, and we should probably start to bring this down. Obviously people can go to the peacebuildingpodcast.com, check out more if they're interested in this topic. It sounds like you're going to have an episode where you talk more about your Afghan story. So folks may want to tune into that when that episode comes out. But, I guess, just sort of in the closing here, Susan, people want to learn more about you, find you on LinkedIn, find you on the peacebuildingpodcast.com. And where else can they go? And also, what sort of parting advice, words of wisdom do you have out there for team coaches and would-be team coaches, and any sort of final, inspiration here? And then we can start to say goodbye.
Okay. Well, the only other place to find me is cglobal.com, which is my consulting practice. And, I think my words of wisdom, I think my journey has been, I'm a feminist, and long ago in the feminist movement, it was like the personal is political, something like that. I would translate that to, I find that for every bit of work I do on myself and clean up my own stuff and evolve, the better I am at being of service to others. The better I am, I notice it, I'll just say, I am definitely a team coach to my children, I guess, if you could call it that. But I do notice how interesting it is that I work, ancient issues. Of course, some of these issues that we have when we come onto this planet, some of them are generations old. I mean, I don't know. So the more I work those issues, the more clearly I show up on the planet, the more fiercely I stand for collaboration and systems collaboration. I think the more useful and the more value I am to others, and the more value I bring. So I guess my feeling is just that don't minimize the importance of really doing your work and being the strongest. Being the clear channel, because that's really invaluable. There's a lot of pain out there and a lot of need. I feel like coaching is an incredible peace building tool and incredibly needed in terms of bringing people to think in terms of collect. Well, I won't say coaching. I'll say team coaching, but team coaching is an incredible tool to get people to really start thinking about collective leadership. What does that mean?
Yeah, real collaboration.
Really, how do we work together? And it's not an easy journey, and it's a really rewarding one. And it's been the journey that I've been on for a long time. And what's cool about picking a journey that you're constantly going to learn at is that I'm continuing to learn, and that's super exciting. So anyway.
Well, beautiful stuff, Susan. You know, what I'm taking away from today is if you can bring team coaching into the women in the Afghan government, I think it sort of says that we could probably we could do that anywhere. So for the team coaches out there, be bold. You know, it is challenging, but you know, Susan getting out and going through all that security and all that, you know, I think it just shows what's possible.
Let me just say one other
please.
other thing about team coaching is that, like, I another client I've been working with in a peacekeeping environment, you know, I just noticed in that environment that the high level team is really at odds with each other, and there they are in a context where they're trying to build peace in a society that's really in conflict.
They're not modeling it.
And you know, and I'm hoping that I get in there to really be able to do some team coaching with them, but I think at these high levels, these teams at high levels, they really need this stuff. Yeah. They really need to understand how to come together and how to work as a collective.
Yeah. Well, good stuff, Susan. So I'm going to put all this into the show notes of the episodes for this podcast, which people can find out at teamcoachingzone.com/Susan Coleman. We'll be putting it out there. Really excited to get this out to the world. I think I'm going to make this the last episode of interview for 2016. So we'll close out episode number 70 with this one. And Susan, really, again, great to have you on the show. Really excited to see where the Peacebuilding podcast and your journey takes you in 2017 and beyond. And have a wonderful rest of 2016, the few days that are left. And good stuff. So.
Yeah, thanks, Krister. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
all right.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Team Coaching Zone podcast. Check out www.teamcoachingzone.com for show notes and for more awesome information and resources. See you next time, and stay in the zone.